Hi guys, welcome to another installment of Drummer's Philosophy. We're going to go over sight reading today in a very broad sense. I'm not going to teach you how to sight read every rhythm forever, but I'm going to give you the basis for how to sight read so that you can do it. So when we say sight reading, we mean how to play a rhythm without having to count it out note by note and being able to play it sort of on first glance. So if I wrote a rhythm out, you would just be able to play it back to me immediately. So first, let's talk about how to just read English, because the psychological basis is sort of the same. So if we look at this word here, drum, every single one of you can probably read that without sounding it out. When we all learned how to read, we went drum, drum. And we realized after 3 different run-throughs, if we didn't make any mistakes, that this is the word drum. Now that you know how to read it, you can just simply look at it, and it's obviously the word drum. You don't sound it out every time, at least 99% of you don't. You just see the word as a whole, and you just zero in, your brain automatically, bam, drum. There's no sounding out, there's no letter recognition. And in fact, there's like an internet meme that goes around where all the words are misspelled and you can still read them. And it's actually because of a real phenomenon where even if I turned this into derm, like this, and put these middle 2 letters out of order, if this letter and this letter are in the right place and these letters are the correct letters and it's in the context of a sentence, you could still read this as drum because your brain sees all the correct letters. If it's obviously on its own, it looks weird, but in a sentence, strangely enough, you'd be able to read that. Now, this word, on the other hand, is a real word. I did not make this up. It's floxinosinihilipilification, and it's the act of deeming something to be worthless, which is kind of a joke because the word itself is worthless. But if I told you to read this, you'd have to sit there and go floxinosinihilipilification. And then it would take you probably 10 minutes before you could say it in one burst, and I had to practice saying it as well. But even if you're a great English reader, you would still have to sort of sound this word out, because I'm guaranteeing that 99% of you have never seen this word before in context or out of context. So it's really very difficult for you. Now, when we're looking at music, most people who are not good at sight reading are still reading music the way they have to read this word, instead of reading music the way they have to read this word. They're still counting it out, which is the same as sounding it out, rather than just recognizing it. Okay, so reading music is very similar to reading those words. This measure is equivalent to the word drum. It has very few letters, and you kind of already know what it is. If you know how to read music a little bit, you don't probably have to count out the fact that 4 quarter notes just sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? That's not a big deal. So we've sort of committed that rhythm to memory. We understand what a quarter note is. We don't have to count it out each time. That is the basis of sight reading. This measure is more like the longer word we did earlier, and most people who just learned to read would have trouble, obviously because my handwriting is terrible, but also because this is a complicated rhythm. If you're good at sight reading, though, you probably can play this without counting it out too terribly hard. And the way you do that is by recognizing the words in the sentence, essentially, as concrete individual units rather than counting it out. Now, we could count it out, the same as sounding it out. Right, we could say 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4, right? And that would be like sounding it out. 1 and 2 E, 3, 4, right? But that wasn't sight reading, that was counting it out. To sight read, we have to recognize that this, an eighth and 2/16, always sounds the same. 1 E and We have to recognize that this over here, the eighth, the dotted eighth, and the 16th, always sound like 3 E and right? 3 That is a word. If your brain can recognize these chunks as words and just hear in their head the sound of them without counting out 1 and if you just hear in your brain when you see this symbol, or you just hear when you see this symbol, right? then you will be able to sight read. You will be able to see the words and read the sentence the way you could read an English sentence. Okay, on the other hand, sometimes this method up here is just not possible. You're going to run across a measure where the notation is in a non-standard format, i.e. it's not grouped into beats, and you got ties and dots and rests combined in the same measure, and you're going to go, hold on. And now, this isn't like you failed at sight reading. You can get better and better, but at some point this is going to come up. So the next trick to sight reading, really the other trick basically of the two that I'm going to say here today, is if you can't recognize the words, sound it out before you start playing. If you're given a piece to sight read, typically you're going to have at least a few seconds to a few minutes to look at it before you got to count it in. You got to skim it and look for non-standard or odd situations like this before you start playing, because if you're counting along at a quick tempo, this is going to be very difficult to ascertain. Okay, but if you've seen it beforehand and you make yourself some notes on it, then okay, maybe it's possible to get right, or at least get close, as long as it's in the context of a bunch of other stuff you can do. So I've gone ahead and counted this out, and so this would go 1, 2, 3 E, so or 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, which is weird, syncopated, and this is not how you would write this in any sane way. But if this showed up in a piece, as long as the rest of it was chunks you could comprehend, you could count it out like I have, and you could get it right. And this one measure would only take you a few seconds to figure out, and you could then sight read the rest of the piece. So basically between sort of pre-looking for things like this before you start playing and reading things as if they're words rather than individual notes like this, you should be able to develop an ability to sight read that is at least somewhat practical for most purposes. So thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.